"Stop! I'll buy the fat girl," the prince shouted, and the whole marketplace froze. Dust hung in the air. Church bells tolled. A servant girl stood trembling on the wooden block, mocked and shamed before the crowd dot. But then something unthinkable happened. She refused to bow, refused to play the part of the poor wretch they expected. Instead, she chose a path no one could have imagined, a choice that would shake the palace to its very foundations, because this was no simple act of charity. Dark whispers in the court turned kindness into scandal, secrets twisted into accusations. And soon the girl who once scrubbed floors stood at the center of a storm that could ruin a prince or redeem them both. What drove her to defy the world's cruelest stage? And when the truth comes crashing down, will love be her salvation or her downfall? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The brisk spring morning painted Munich's market square in golden light as peasants and nobles alike gathered beneath fluttering feast day banners. The cobblestones echoed with footsteps and the cheerful calls of merchants hawking their wares. Yet amid the bustling scene, a cruel spectacle was unfolding that would change two lives forever. Baron von Reckland stood beside a wooden platform, his expensive velvet coat gleaming as he gestured dramatically to the woman standing above the crowd. His thin lips curved in a sneer as he called out, "Come on, come all. See what becomes of lazy servants who eat more than they work." Greta stood straight-backed on the platform, her round face flushed but determined. Though her plain brown dress marked her as a servant, she held herself with quiet dignity. The Baron's words cut through the morning air like daggers. "Look at this useless creature," he proclaimed, circling the platform like a predatory cat. "My late wife's personal maid, who has grown fat on my generosity. Who will take her off my hands? Surely someone has need of a girl who excels at emptying pantries." Laughter rippled through the gathering crowd. A few merchants joined in the cruel sport, calling out mock bids that made the Baron's eyes glitter with malicious delight. 2 copper pieces for such a fine appetite. Nay, good sir, she'd eat you out of house and home. Greta's cheeks burned, but she refused to bow her head. Her hands, rough from years of honest work, remained steady at her sides. The morning sun caught the slight trembling of her lower lip, the only sign that the Baron's cruelty had found its mark. "Come now," the Baron continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "Surely someone sees value in such a substantial servant? Though I warn you, she has opinions above her station. Thinks herself too good to scrub floors properly. More." Jeers followed, and Greta felt each one like a physical blow. Yet still she stood tall, even as her heart pounded beneath her bodice. The Baron had been tormenting her for weeks, ever since she'd refused to spy on other servants for him. This public humiliation was his revenge dot, just as the Baron opened his mouth for another cutting remark. A clear voice rang out above the crowd's laughter. "Stop! I'll buy the fat girl." The words were shocking enough to silence the square. The crowd parted like water around a stone as a tall figure strode forward. He wore simple but fine clothing, and though he carried himself like a nobleman, few recognized in Dot it was Prince Leopold of Saxony, though none in the crowd knew him. He had come to Munich in secret, wanting to observe the city and its people, without the pomp of a royal visit. Now he stood before the platform, his dark eyes flashing with barely contained anger. The Baron's face flickered with uncertainty, before he covered it with a practiced smile. "My good sir, surely you jest? I assure you, I do not." Leopold's voice carried authority that made even the Baron pause. "Name your price." Murmurs swept through the crowd as the Baron named an outrageous sum. Without hesitation, Leopold produced a heavy coin purse that gleamed in the morning light. The Baron's eyes widened at the sight of such wealth dot as coins changed hands, Leopold turned to face Greta on the platform. His voice rang out clear and strong. "You are free, good woman. Number one owns you now." The declaration sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Nobles who had been laughing moments before now whispered behind their hands, uncertain how to react to this unexpected turn of events. The Baron's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. Greta looked down at the man who had purchased. Her freedom, her expression a complex mixture of relief and wounded pride. Custom dictated she should curtsy to her benefactor, but she remained standing straight, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. In that moment of tension, as the crowd held its breath waiting for her response, Greta made her choice. She did not bow. She did not curtsy. Instead, she met Leopold's gaze steadily, claiming her dignity with that simple act of rebellion. The morning breeze stirred the feast day banners overhead, and the sounds of the market gradually resumed around them. But in that space between Greta and her unlikely savior, something had shifted, though neither yet knew just how much their lives would change from this moment forward. As the market square's bustle faded into afternoon shadows, Prince Leopold guided Greta away from the dispersing crowd. The jeers still echoed in her ears, but she held her head high, her sturdy frame moving with deliberate dignity despite her trembling hands. "My lady," Leopold said softly, his cultured voice gentle. "As spring rain, you need fear no more mockery. You shall have a proper position, one worthy of—" "Begging your pardon, Your Highness," Greta interrupted, her plain voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I am no lady, and I'll not be pitied by one." She met his startled gaze directly, her brown eyes clear and unwavering. "I thank you for the rescue, but I owe you nothing more than that thanks." Leopold's blue eyes widened, unused to such forthright speech from a servant. A smile tugged at his lips. "Indeed? Then perhaps we might arrange a fair exchange instead. The palace kitchens are short-staffed, and your years of service deserve proper compensation." He gestured to a waiting carriage. "Will you accept a position there? Not as charity, but as your due?" Greta considered his words carefully, weighing pride against practicality. "Aye, Your Highness. That I'll accept, if it's honest work you're offering." The carriage rattled over cobblestones as they made their way to the palace. Greta sat stiffly on the plush seat, her rough hands folded in her lap while Leopold arranged matters through his steward. Soon enough, she found herself descending stone steps into the vast palace kitchens, where the air hung thick with steam and the scent of roasting meat. Whispers followed her like autumn leaves in a breeze. "That's her, the one the prince bought in the square. Did you hear? He paid in gold. What's a royal doing, concerning himself with the likes of her?" The head cook, a round woman with flour-dusted arms, gave Greta a long look before nodding. "We can use another pair of hands, sure enough. You'll start with vegetable prep." She pointed to a worn wooden table near the hearth. "Prove yourself useful, and we'll see about more." Greta took her place at the table, accepting a knife and a mountain of turnips without complaint. The familiar work steadied her nerves as afternoon melted into evening. Candles were lit, their warm glow catching the steam rising from copper pots and casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. A young scullery maid showed her to the servants' quarters, a narrow bed in a room shared with 3 others, but clean and warm. "It's not much," the girl whispered, "but it's better than some get." "It's more than enough," Greta replied firmly, smoothing the rough blanket with careful hands. When the kitchen work was done for the day, Greta made her way to the servants' chapel. The small space smelled of tallow candles and old wood, its wooden pews worn smooth by generations of working hands. She knelt on the hard floor, her heavy skirts pooling around her. "Lord above," she whispered, her voice barely stirring the quiet. "I thank you for my freedom this day. but I'll not live on charity, not even from a prince. Give me strength to work honest and true, to earn my place by my own hands." She crossed herself carefully, the gesture as familiar as breathing dot above. In the grand dining hall, crystal glasses clinked and silk rustled as the nobility took their evening meal. Leopold sat among them, his formal attire a far cry from his plain dress in the market square. The Countess von Werther's laugh cut through the polite murmur of conversation. "Really, Your Highness buying a servant girl like a sack of flour? How? Charitable." Her painted lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Most irregular," agreed Baron Steinfeld, dabbing his mouth with a fine linen napkin. "Sets a dangerous precedent, showing such concern for the lower orders." Leopold's fingers tightened on his fork, but his voice remained even. "I find true nobility shows itself in actions, not titles, my friends. The divide between above and below stairs had never seemed wider than in that moment, between the glittering dining hall where nobles scoffed at compassion, and the humble chapel where a servant girl prayed by candlelight, determined to forge her own path with dignity. The palace kitchens buzzed with frantic energy as servants rushed to prepare for the evening's grand banquet. Greta's arms ached from hours of polishing silver until each piece gleamed like morning frost. Dawn had barely touched the windows when she'd begun, and now dusk painted the sky in deep purples beyond the steamy kitchen panes. "Mind those platters. Don't slip, girl," called Cook, her face red from the roasting fires. "Those are worth more than 10 years of our wages." Greta steadied the heavy silver trencher in her work-roughened hands, careful not to let the perfectly arranged roasted pheasant slide from its bed of herbs. The kitchen air was thick with the scent of garlic, rosemary, and wood smoke. Around her, other servants darted to and fro, carrying delicacies fit for princes, glazed fruits, honey-drip pastries, and platters of tender meat. The courts, gathering above, whispered Anna, a kitchen maid with kind eyes. "They say His Highness specifically requested you attend." Greta's heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. "Then I'll attend as is proper, nothing more." The great hall blazed with hundreds of beeswax candles when Greta entered with her burden. Silk-clad nobles lounged at the long tables while musicians played softly from the gallery. Their jewels sparkled like stars against rich velvets and brocades. She felt every eye turn toward her plain figure as she placed the trencher before the high table. Prince Leopold rose from his ornate chair, silencing the hall with a raised hand. "Good people of Munich," his voice carried clearly across the hushed room, "I would have you meet the woman whose courage caught my notice yesterday. Come forward, Greta." Her legs trembling beneath her rough skirts, Greta stepped into the pool of candlelight before the high table. She could feel the courtiers' stares like physical touches, some curious, some dismissive, some openly scornful. "In recognition of your dignity under duress," Leopold continued warmly, "I hereby offer you a permanent position at court, where none shall dare mock you again. You shall be—" "Your Highness is most generous," Greta interrupted, her clear voice carrying in the startled silence. "But I must decline." Gasps rippled through the hall like wind through summer wheat. Leopold's eyes widened in surprise. "I will serve faithfully in the kitchens, as any honest worker might," Greta continued, her hands clasped tightly before her. "But I'll not be kept as a curiosity, displayed to prove your kindness. My labor and loyalty you may have, but my dignity is my own." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the musicians had stopped playing, their instruments frozen mid-note. Leopold stood very still, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "You dare refuse His Highness's generosity?" A noblewoman's scandalized voice cut through the quiet. Greta lifted her chin. "I dare speak truth, my lady. Nothing more." Without waiting to be dismissed, she turned and walked steadily from the hall, her wooden shoes clicking against the marble floor. It wasn't until she reached the servants' stairs that her hands began to shake. Later that night, as Greta lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, voices drifted through the thin walls. "Did you hear? She refused him outright, bold as brass." "Fool girl. She'll be back in the streets by morning. Mark my words." "I don't know. There was something fine about it, standing up like that. Something almost noble. Noble won't fill her belly when she's begging in the square again." Greta pulled her thin blanket tighter, staring into the darkness. The servants' wing was cold, far from the great fireplaces that warmed the noble chambers above. She had spoken true. She would always speak true. But truth was a dangerous luxury for those who served. Perhaps she had been too bold, too proud. Perhaps her newfound freedom would prove shorter-lived than spring snow. Still, as she closed her eyes, she couldn't bring herself to regret her words. Better honest labor than gilded chains, even if the price was safety. With that thought to warm her, she drifted into an uneasy sleep, while above in the great hall, the feast continued without her. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones as Greta made her way through the palace gates, wooden buckets swinging from her yoke. Her shoulders already ached from hours of scrubbing pots, but the kitchen's water barrels needed filling before the day's cooking could begin. The town square was quieter at this early hour, with only a few merchants setting up their stalls. The steady creak of the water pump filled the crisp morning air as Greta positioned her first bucket. As she worked the iron handle, a small movement caught her eye. Behind the pump, a boy no more than 8 years old huddled against the stone wall. His clothes hung in tatters, and his thin face bore the hollow-cheeked look of long hunger. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, pulling his knees closer to his chest. "Good morning, little one," Greta said softly, her heart clenching at his obvious distress. "Are you hungry?" The boy, Hans was his name, she would later learn, gave a slight nod but remained silent. Greta glanced down at the leather purse hidden beneath her apron, where Leopold's gold coins still rested. She had planned to save them, perhaps to rent a small room of her own someday. But looking at the child's trembling form, she knew she could not walk away. "Here," she whispered, drawing out one gleaming coin. It caught the morning light as she pressed it into his small, dirt-stained hand. "Take this to the baker's shop. It will feed you and your family for many days." Hans stared at the coin in wonder, his eyes growing wide. "Thank you, miss," he breathed, clutching it tight. Before Greta could say more, he darted away into the awakening streets. Returning to the palace kitchens with her water buckets, Greta tucked the lighter purse back into its hiding place. She threw herself into her work, kneading bread dough and chopping vegetables with renewed vigor. The memory of the boy's grateful face made her own empty stomach feel less hollow. That evening, as she carried platters of sweetmeats to the great hall, Prince Leopold appeared in a quiet corridor. He wore simple clothes, as though trying to blend in with the servants, but his noble bearing was unmistakable. "Good evening, Greta," he said, his voice gentle. "I trust you are settling well into your duties?" "Yes, your highness," she replied with a small curtsy, careful not to upset her tray. "And the coins I gave you, they are helping to ease your transition?" Greta felt her cheeks warm. "They are most generous, your highness." "I am grateful for your kindness." Leopold's keen eyes studied her face. "Yet I notice your purse seems lighter today." "The market offers many necessities, my lord," Greta answered carefully, unwilling to speak of her morning's charity. To boast of such an act would cheapen its meaning. "Indeed it does," Leopold replied slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing his features. With a slight bow, he let her pass. Meanwhile, across town in a humble cottage, Hans burst through the door, breathless with excitement. His widowed mother looked up from her mending, startled by his entrance. When he opened his small fist to reveal the gold coin, she gasped. "Where did you get this?" she asked, fear and hope warring in her voice. "A kind lady at the pump," Hans explained, describing Greta's sturdy figure and gentle manner. "She saw I was hungry and gave it to me, Mother. She said it would feed us." For days, as Hans and his mother embraced, tears of relief streaming down their faces, a different scene unfolded in the palace gardens. 3 richly dressed courtiers huddled near a rose bower, their heads close together in conspiratorial whispers. "Did you hear?" one nobleman hissed. "The kitchen maid who refused our prince's generosity was seen giving away his gold this morning." "How?" "Interesting," a lady replied, her painted lips curving in a cruel smile. "One wonders what other valuables she might be redistributing." "Perhaps," added the third, adjusting his powdered wig, "we should ensure His Highness learns of her. Charitable nature." Their laughter, soft and malicious, drifted through the gathering dusk as they plotted to twist Greta's act of kindness into something far darker. The palace kitchens hummed with activity as dawn broke over Munich. Greta moved between steaming cauldrons and busy workbenches, her sturdy frame a constant presence wherever help was needed. When young Alice, a scullery maid, struggled with a heavy pot of soup, Greta stepped in without hesitation. "Here now, love," she said softly, taking the weight. "Let us manage this together." Over the past several days, such small kindnesses had not gone unnoticed. The servants whispered among themselves, but their words carried warmth rather than mockery. They saw how Greta stayed late to mend torn linens by candlelight, how she rubbed salve into the laundress's cracked hands, how she never complained even when assigned the most grueling tasks. "That one's worth her weight in gold," Cook declared. One morning, watching Greta comfort a kitchen maid who had broken a valuable dish. "Never mind what them fancy folks say upstairs." But upstairs, in the gilded halls where nobility gathered, cruel whispers followed Greta like shadows. Ladies hidden behind painted fans tittered as she passed with fresh linens. "The fat prince's pet," one countess sneered, loud enough to carry. "How charitable of His Highness to collect such specimens." "Perhaps he means to start a menagerie," another added. Drawing delighted laughs thought, yet one pair of eyes watched more keenly than the rest. The Dowager Duchess, wrapped in black silk and crowned with silver hair, observed everything from her favorite chair near the window. She noted how Greta kept her head high despite the whispers, how the girl's hands remained gentle even when her cheeks burned with shame. On Wednesday afternoon, as the ladies gathered for their weekly sewing circle, the Dowager made her move. The noble women perched on delicate chairs, working on their embroidery as Greta entered with fresh tea. "Girl," the Dowager's voice cut through the chatter. "Come here." Greta approached with proper deference, expecting another task. Instead, the Dowager gestured to an empty chair beside her own. "Sit," she commanded. "Show me your needlework." A shocked silence fell over the room. Ladies froze mid-stitch, eyes widening at this unprecedented breach of social order. Greta hesitated only a moment before settling carefully onto the chair's edge, drawing out the simple handkerchief she had been mending. "Your stitches are neat," the Dowager observed, examining the work, small and even. "You learned this in service?" "Yes, Your Grace," Greta replied softly. "My mother taught me first, then the housekeeper at Baron von Recklin's estate." For 15 minutes, the Dowager kept Greta beside her, asking quiet questions about different techniques while the other ladies watched in stunned silence. When she finally dismissed Greta, there was a hint of approval in her stern face. Later that evening, as purple twilight settled over the palace, Greta slipped into the chapel. The small space smelled of beeswax and incense, its silence a balm after the day's tensions. She approached the altar with a single candle, thinking of the hungry child she had helped days before. "I pray they found shelter," she whispered, touching the flame to the wick. Who found shelter? The voice startled her. Prince Leopold stepped from the shadows, his fine coat dark in the candlelight. Greta dropped into a curtsy, her heart beating faster. Your Highness, I was just praying for those less fortunate. Leopold moved closer, his expression gentle. You have a generous heart, Greta. I have watched you these past days. You give freely of yourself, expecting nothing in return. I give only what I can, Your Highness, she murmured, unable to meet his gaze. And yet that giving has earned you more respect than all the gold in Bavaria could buy. His voice softened. The servants speak of your kindness. Even the Dowager Duchess, who rarely notices anyone below a baron's rank, has marked your worth. Greta's hands trembled as she arranged her candle. Your Highness is too kind. I am only doing what anyone would do. No, Leopold said quietly. You do what very few would have the courage to do. You remain true to yourself, despite everything. Their eyes met in the flickering light, and something unspoken passed between them. Greta felt her breath catch, seeing the warmth in his gaze. For one dangerous moment, she allowed herself to imagine, but no. She looked away quickly, her hands clasped tight to stop their shaking. I should return to my duties, Your Highness. Leopold stepped back, allowing her space to pass. Good night, Greta. In the safety of the servants' corridor, Greta pressed a hand to her thundering heart. These feelings, this warmth that bloomed whenever the prince was near, they were more dangerous than any mockery or scorn. A serving girl could not, must not, dream of a prince. The week brought relentless spring rains to Munich, turning dirt roads to mud and swelling the rivers beyond their banks. Word reached the palace of villages underwater, families fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs. In the vast palace kitchens, Greta's heart ached at the news of such suffering. We cannot sit idle while children go hungry, she declared, rolling up her sleeves. The kitchen staff watched as she began pulling out enormous copper pots and directing the gathering of supplies. Mary, fetch the day-old bread from the pantry. Thomas, we need more firewood for the ovens. Sarah, help me with these vegetables. Soon, the kitchen was alive with purpose. Even the stable boys, drawn by the commotion, found themselves pressed into service, carrying heavy sacks of grain. Greta moved among them like a general commanding troops, but her voice remained gentle, her instructions clear and kind. The broth must be hearty, she told the cooks, testing the seasoning herself. These poor souls need strength. Her own rounded figure testified to her understanding of food as comfort, as survival. Outside, the rain continued to drum against the windows, but inside the kitchen grew warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread and simmering soup. Greta's face glistened with sweat as she worked, her brown hair escaping its cap in damp curls. Yet her eyes shone with determination. When the food was ready to be distributed, a figure appeared in a plain brown cloak, hood drawn against the rain. Only when he stepped into the lamplight did Greta recognize Prince Leopold. Her heart skipped, but she gave no sign beyond a respectful nod. Your Highness, she said softly, we have prepared food for the flood victims. Then let me help distribute. It, he replied, reaching for one of the heavy pots. When his courtiers would have protested, he silenced them with a look. Together, they went out into the rain. The refugee families had gathered in the churchyard, huddled under whatever shelter they could find. Greta led the way, organizing the distribution with quiet efficiency. Leopold watched as she knelt beside an elderly woman, making sure she could hold her bowl steady. He saw her slip extra bread to a mother with 3 small children, saw her gentle smile as she wiped a little boy's chin. The villagers' gratitude shone in their eyes. God bless you, miss, they murmured, and thank you, thank you. But Greta deflected their thanks, saying only, "We help each other in times of need, nothing more." Leopold found himself carrying bowls alongside her, their shoulders sometimes brushing in the press of hungry people. He saw how naturally leadership sat upon her, how she knew exactly where to direct help, how to speak to each person with dignity, despite their desperate state. As evening approached, they made their way to the church vestry to warm themselves. Candles flickered in wall sconces, casting soft shadows. They stood close together, their wet clothes steaming slightly in the warmth. "You have a gift," Leopold said softly, "for knowing what people need." Greta smoothed her damp skirts, not meeting his eyes. "I have known hunger, Your Highness, and kindness. Both teach lasting lessons." "Leopold," he corrected gently. "Please, when we are alone." His hand moved as if to take hers, and for a moment their fingers brushed. The touch sent warmth spreading through Greta's chest. Dangerous as lightning. "Your Highness," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Such familiarity is folly. You know it as well as I." The candlelight caught the angles of his face, the yearning in his eyes. "Greta, I must tell you." "No," she interrupted softly. "Please, whatever you would say, it can only bring pain." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. The candles guttered in a draught, making shadows dance on the walls. Their hands remained close enough to touch, though neither moved. In that moment of stillness, the air seemed to hum with all they could not say, all they could not be. The rain drummed on the church roof above them, a steady reminder of the world outside, of duty and station and the barriers between a prince and a kitchen maid. Yet still they stood, neither moving away, letting the silence speak what their lips dared not form. The great brass bell of the palace tolled 3 times, its somber echo filling the stone corridors. Greta looked up from her work in the kitchens, her hands deep in bread dough, as a palace guard appeared at the doorway. "The court summons you," he announced, his face grave. Now, the kitchen fell silent. Cook handed Greta a clean apron, helping her wipe the flour from her hands. Whispers followed her through the corridors as she walked behind the guard, her sturdy shoes clicking against the marble floors. The court chamber doors swung open. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the gathered nobles in their silk finery. Baron von Reckland stood at the center, his thin lips curved in a satisfied smile. Beside him huddled a familiar figure, the starving child. She had helped Hans, but now he looked terrified, his mother clutching his shoulder. "Step forward," commanded the senior magistrate, his voice echoing in the hushed chamber. Greta moved to the center of the room, conscious of her plain dress and work-reddened hands among the pristine courtiers. Baron von Reckland's voice cut through the silence. "This servant girl has betrayed the crown's trust. She has taken royal property, coins given in charity by His Highness, Prince Leopold, and distributed them among peasants without permission. Furthermore," he paused dramatically, "she has used this act to curry favor among the common folk, spreading whispers against the crown." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly. Greta's heart pounded, but she kept her chin high. From his formal seat, Prince Leopold sat rigid, his face a mask of controlled anger. "The boy will speak," declared the magistrate. Hans stepped forward, trembling. Greta could see tears in his eyes as he spoke words clearly rehearsed. She gave me a gold coin, saying the prince was foolish with his money, and that common folk deserved it more. "I never said such things." Greta's voice rang out clear and strong. "Yes, I gave him the coin. He was starving. His mother had nothing. It was my coin to give, bestowed freely by His Highness. I spoke no ill words, only wished to help a hungry child." The Baron's laugh was cruel. "And who will speak for your character? What noble witness will vouch for these claims?" Silence fell. Greta looked around the chamber, seeing only averted eyes among the nobility. The servants who knew her truth stood, pressed against the walls, powerless to speak in such proceedings. The magistrate shuffled his papers. Without testimony from those of proper rank, and with evidence of misused royal property, this court finds you guilty. He peered at her over his spectacles. The sentence is banishment from court. You have 1 fortnight to depart. This is unjust. Prince Leopold surged to his feet, his voice sharp with authority, but the magistrate raised his hand. Your Highness, with respect, you are here as a guest of our court. These matters of internal discipline are governed by our protocols. You have no standing to intervene. Leopold's hands clenched at his sides, but centuries of protocol bound him silent. His eyes met Greta's, filled with helpless rage and something deeper that made her heart ache. Greta stood straight, dignity wrapping around her like a cloak. She turned to Leopold and sank into one perfect curtsy, not the awkward bob of a servant, but the graceful movement of a woman of worth. Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness, she said softly. I shall always remember it. The guard stepped forward to escort her out. As Greta walked from the chamber, she heard muffled sobs. The palace servants lined the corridors, many wiping tears. Cook pressed a small bundle of food into her hands as she passed the kitchen. The laundresses hugged her fiercely. Even the stable boys removed their caps and respect Dot in her tiny room in the servants' quarters. Greta gathered her few belongings, the prayer book from her mother, a shawl, 2 sturdy dresses. Her hands shook only slightly as she folded each item carefully. Through her small window, she could see the palace gardens where she had walked with Leopold, speaking of dreams and dignity. Now those dreams lay shattered, swept away by cruel lies and crueler justice. But as she tied her bundle, her back remained straight, her spirit unbroken. They could take her position, her security, even her good name, but they could not take her truth. The coin had bought a hungry child bread, and she would make that same choice again, even knowing the cost. The pale light of dawn crept over Munich's spires as Greta stood at the palace gates, clutching her small bundle of clothes, wrapped in rough cloth. Her eyes were dry, though her heart ached with each beat. The morning air bit through her thin cloak, and dark clouds threatened rain above Dot behind her. The grand palace that had briefly been her home loomed silent and imposing. Before her stretched the cobbled road leading to the city's outskirts, worn, smooth by countless travelers, though few, she imagined, with such heavy hearts as hers. Miss Greta, came a whispered chorus. At the gates, a cluster of kitchen maids and stable boys had gathered to bid her farewell. Their faces were drawn with worry and helpless anger. Old Thomas, the head cook who had taught her to season the castle's soups, pressed a small loaf of bread into her hands. For the journey, he mumbled, his voice rough with emotion. We know. You spoke true about that coin. We all saw your kindness. Greta accepted the bread with trembling fingers. Thank you, all of you. You've been more family to me than... Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard. The first drops of rain began to fall as she took her first steps away from the palace. By the time she reached the market square, the very place where Leopold had first saved her from humiliation, the rain had become a steady downpour. Her clothes grew heavy with water, and her hair clung to her face in dark strands. Through bleary eyes, she saw townsfolk pause in their morning routines to stare and whisper. There goes the fat maid, she heard one merchant mutter to another. Cast out for theft, they say. The words stung, but Greta held her head high, remembering the dignity that even Leopold had admired in her. Leopold. His name in her thoughts made her steps falter. She would never see him again, never catch his gentle smile across a crowded hall, never feel the warmth of his presence in the chapel. Never hear his voice soften when he spoke to her as though she were worthy of tenderness. By midday, she reached the Wanderer's Rest, a modest alehouse on the city's edge. The innkeeper's wife, a kind-faced woman named Martha, took one look at Greta's sodden state and clucked her tongue in sympathy. "Come in, child. Let's get you dry before you catch your death." In a small room above the alehouse, Greta knelt beside a narrow bed. The rough wooden floorboards pressed against her knees as she clasped her hands in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength to bear this burden. Help me find honest work, somewhere far from here, where none know my shame." Below, she could hear the murmur of voices as word of her disgrace spread through the alehouse. The story grew with each telling. She had stolen jewels, some said, or plotted against the prince himself. Greta pressed her hands harder together until her knuckles went white. "I must look forward," she told herself firmly. "Perhaps in some other town I can find work in a kitchen or laundry. Somewhere I can earn my bread without—" She couldn't finish the thought. Without seeing Leopold's face in every shadow? Without remembering the way hope had bloomed in her heart, foolish as a winter flower? Evening was settling over the city when rapid footsteps thundered up the alehouse stairs. A sharp knock at her door made Greta start. "Yes? Message for you, miss," called a boy's voice. "Most urgent." Greta opened the door to find a royal messenger, barely more than 12 years old, out of breath and clutching a sealed note. His presence made her heart leap and sink all at once. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the message. The elegant script could only have come from one hand, the Dowager Duchess herself. By order of her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Saxony, Greta Weber is commanded to present herself before the court tomorrow at noon. Failure to appear will result in severe consequences. Greta sank onto the bed, the paper crushed in her grip. The Duchess? She whispered. But why would she? Fear and hope warred in her chest as she gathered her few belongings. Whatever awaited her at court, justice or further humiliation, she would face it with the same dignity that had carried her through every trial. Outside her window, the rain had finally stopped, and the setting sun painted the clouds in shades of gold and purple. Greta touched the rough stone wall of her room, steadying herself. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, she had prayers to say and courage to gather. The great court chamber blazed with hundreds of candles as Greta stood before the assembled nobles. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, making the lady's jewels glitter like morning dew. The air felt thick with tension and whispered accusations. Baron von Recklin's voice rang out, sharp with triumph. The evidence against this common thief is clear. Let the final judgment be pronounced. Just then, the heavy wooden doors burst open. A small figure darted through the startled guards. The thin boy Greta had helped, Hans, with his mother close behind. Both were breathless, their clothes humble but clean. "Please, your grace," Hans called out, his young voice cutting through the murmurs. "You mustn't punish her. The coin she gave us, it saved our lives." His mother stepped forward, trembling, but determined. "My son speaks true, your grace. We had nothing, no food, no hope. This good woman's kindness kept us from starving. She asked nothing in return, not even our names." The Dowager Duchess rose from her seat, her silk skirts rustling. Her keen eyes swept over the assembled court. "I have watched this woman since she arrived," she declared. While others whispered behind fans and plotted in shadows, she worked without complaint. She showed more nobility in her charity than I have seen in 1,000 courtly gestures. From the gathered villagers who had come to witness the proceedings, voices began to rise. "She helped during the floods," one called out. "Gave us bread when we had nothing," added another. "Treated us like people, she did." The chamber filled with their voices, drowning out the scandalized gasps of the nobles. Baron von Recklin's face darkened with fury as his accusations crumbled. Prince Leopold, who had been watching in silence, suddenly strode forward. His boots echoed on the marble floor as he crossed to where Greta stood. Without hesitation, he took her work-roughened hand in his. "My lords and ladies," he announced, his voice ringing with authority, "you see before you the most noble soul in this chamber, not by birth, but by the content of her heart." He turned to face Greta, his eyes bright with determination. "And I hereby declare my intention to make her my bride." The court fell utterly silent. Fans stopped fluttering. Even the morning birds seemed to pause their songs outside the windows. Greta's heart thundered in her chest as Leopold's warm hand held hers, steady and sure before all the world. The great cathedral's bells rang out across Munich for 3 consecutive Sundays, their deep tones announcing the marriage banns between Prince Leopold and Greta. Each time the priest read their names, more common folk crowded into the pews, their warm boots and patched clothes a stark contrast to the noble's finery. "She's one of us," the kitchen maids whispered proudly. "She proved that a good heart matters more than birth." Their whispers spread through the marketplace, taverns, and servants' quarters, turning Greta into a symbol of hope for all who dreamed of rising above their station through virtue rather than scheming. On the morning of the wedding, dawn painted the cathedral windows in rainbow hues. In a small chamber, the palace laundresses fussed over Greta's gown, their gift of love sewn by candlelight after long days of work. The dress was simple but elegant, adorned with delicate embroidery depicting spring flowers and wheat stalks, symbols of both abundance and honest labor. "There now," said Agnes, the head laundress, blinking back tears as she smoothed the fabric. "You look every inch a princess, because you've always had a princess's heart." The cathedral doors opened, and Greta walked the length of the nave with measured steps. Hundreds of faces turned to watch, nobles in their silk finery, servants in their Sunday best, and villagers still dusty from the fields. Her head was high, her bearing dignified, every step a testament to the inner strength that had carried her through hardship to this moment. At the altar, Leopold's face glowed with joy and pride. The Dowager Duchess stood beside him, her presence a clear statement of royal approval. Her stern nod toward the assembled nobility carried an unmistakable command: accept this union or face her displeasure. Even the most resistant lords and ladies found themselves bowing to the inevitable as evening settled over the palace. Torches flickered in the formal gardens, casting dancing shadows through the rose arbors. Leopold and Greta, now prince and princess, walked hand in hand along the gravel paths, finally alone after a day of ceremony and celebration. "I must tell you something," Greta said softly, pausing beside a marble fountain. "That day in the market square, I never wished to be bought like cattle at auction." Leopold drew her close, his voice gentle. "My dearest, I never bought you. I simply did what no one else had done, recognize your true worth before all the world. The coin I paid that day was nothing compared to the treasure I found in your heart." The cathedral bells began to ring again, their joyful pealing carrying across the evening air. In their musical voice, they seemed to proclaim that love had triumphed over prejudice, dignity over mockery, and that a new life, built on the foundation of true affection and mutual respect, had truly begun. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.